Hi everyone. Thanks for joining me today. Thanks, Holly Faye. So what I have here today is this sketch. Well, this started off here as this mermaid sketch. And I wanted to do something with it. So yesterday night, I did a slightly more detailed sketch over here that you see. And then I took it, I scanned these pieces. Oh, and I also wanted to have something at the top with two little children perhaps seeing this peeking through the woods, and so I did a couple of little sketches for that. And then I scanned this stuff. Zephyrinks, you're asking if I used photo references. No, I did not use any references at all for this sketch process. I just kind of doodled and sketched. So yeah, so then after I did these sketches, I scanned them and I put them on my computer and came up with a more overall view of where I wanted to go with composition and everything. And then once I have the overall composition figured out, I scale it up to a 1:1 size on my computer. And then I actually I use a Windows Surface Studio. And so I just actually tape tracing paper directly to my monitor screen, and I can trace the whole composition in its full size onto my tracing paper. And so that's what you see here. So this is still an intermediary stage, because at this point now I've got it on tracing paper. I want to get it to my watercolor paper, which is Canson Moulin de Roy is what I've got here. And in order to transfer it, I'm taking these tracing paper pieces, flipping them face down so that my graphite is facing my paper, and positioning stuff in here. And then I tape this down, and I'll show you how I do the transfer process. So let me see, trying to position stuff. I'm going to do the bottom mermaid section first, but the top part has to line up with the top of my page. So I'm just getting some pieces of tape over here. And let's see, where does that go? That goes there. And this, okay. And I'm just taping down the corners just so it doesn't move while I'm doing this transfer portion. Yeah, thank you, Janie. Hi, Marla. And then I just go do this. I just take my nail, side of my nail, and I kind of scrape the back side of this tracing paper. And that will transfer the graphite. Here, let me peel off a little piece over here you can see. So you can see the sketch is getting transferred over from my tracing paper. Whenever I've read about this technique being used, this transfer method, people talk about taking a blunt pencil and tracing over all your lines from the backside, and I find that just way too tedious. This works just as well. And I like using my fingernail because your fingernail is kind of soft. I mean, if you have nicely manicured nails, you probably aren't going to want to do this, but I don't ever have nicely manicured nails. And so, if your fingernail's kind of soft, and so it's not going to cause your paper to have any indentations unless you scratch really, really hard. But you don't really need to scratch hard for the transfer to happen. Yeah, I like this better than graphite paper too, because then you don't have to trace over your whole drawing. I just find that doing that method really tedious, which is kind of funny because, I'm sketching my thing 4 times and I'm complaining about tedium. But I like going back and forth with my sketches like this. So you saw how I had it in my little idea sketchbook, the initial drawing here, and then tracing it on from my computer into this form. But this sketch paper form already is a lot more refined than this, and it's going to go through yet one more stage of refining after I finish transferring this graphite, and I just start actually I erase a lot of it lightly and then I redraw most of it on this page. You'll kind of see as I work. Yeah, you can use a penny too, but like I said, if you use anything that's too hard, you might risk compressing your paper and causing indentations. So you use something softer is generally nice. Bookbinding tools, some of those flat, I don't remember what they're called. They look like a tongue depressor type of thing, but you can use it to crease pages. But those things would probably work pretty well too. Or even a popsicle stick. Lexicon Jordan, you're asking about how do I transfer the sketch to tracing paper and graphite. I traced from the full composition sketch that I had on my computer. So I did my rough sketch and then I scanned those into my computer and I figured how I was going to deal with my composition and placement of everything. And then I size it up to the full 1-to-1 ratio size and I trace that directly. I just tape my tracing paper to my computer monitor. Okay, so that seems to have transferred pretty well. Oh yeah, blending stump probably works really well too. Yeah, something that's nice and soft. So sometimes I need to redo a few sections that I may have missed. That mostly has transferred pretty well. And then I'm going to repeat that process with the upper portion of the painting. Although I think I'm just going to do that later. I don't really want to do it now because if I do it right now, it just gets extra graphite floating around, and really I want to minimize excess graphite because if you have too much of it, then it makes your watercolors get kind of muddy later on when you start painting. Where do I get my ideas from? A lot of times from mythologies, stories, fairy tales. This particular piece was inspired because I just started doing mermaids and I wasn't going to do any mermaids for Mermaid, but I got inspired by seeing everyone else making mermaids, and I started doing a few, and before I knew it, I had a larger idea in mind. So, yeah. All right, the other thing I do is I take just a clean piece of paper, and I use this to put my hand on so that I don't smear things, also to keep the oils from my hand from getting onto my page because that's going to make the water repel. What kind of watercolor paper do I use? This is Moulin de Roy, Canson's Moulin de Roy. Here, let me type that out. So this is Canson's Moulin de Roy is the paper, 300-pound hot press. Some people don't like they feel that it kind of doesn't soak up the pigment as much, but I really enjoy it because I do a lot of dry brush technique and it works really well for that. A lot of botanical artists also enjoy it for that same reason. But then again, a lot of botanical artists do things like painting on parchment, which is super repellent, so I haven't tried parchment yet. Have I ever tried the magic mirror tinted glass method instead of transfers? Yes, I do. I have one, and I use that. It just depends on what mood I'm in. Sometimes I feel like doing it this way. Sometimes I feel like doing that. For this particular piece, I was doing a lot of doodling on my computer and messing around with graphics and layouts and things, so I decided to just do it this way. But yeah, so sometimes I do use the mirror method. I have the etcher one that I use. What materials am I using? Regular tracing paper? Yeah, it's just regular tracing paper. And this now that I'm using, so for the tracing paper sketch, for this one I used a 0.5 lead, 0.5 2B. I want something softer that will transfer better, because if you use too hard of a lead for transferring, it just won't. It just stays on your page because you don't really get much loose graphite with that. But now that I'm down to the final surface, I'm switching over to a HB, and this is actually, oh no, I think this is actually a 2H because it's a really thin lead. It's 0.2. It is, yeah. So this is a Oren's Pentel. Let me type that one out too. Yeah, I do have a list of materials. I have to find a link for that. Where is that? I link it at the end of my videos. So if you go to one of my videos, you'll see the link for where my materials list is. Ah, here it is. Found it. Yeah, thanks for that. You found it for me. All right, now I have a kneaded eraser. These things are fun. And I like them because you don't have a lot of eraser dust when you use them. Well, you don't have any eraser dust. And I can use it to kind of pick up a lot of the extra stuff so that I can lighten my transfer and get rid of the big fuzzy blurry lines of what it transferred, because that is something that happens. You don't get really precise lines. Can I zoom in on this a bit more? Let me see if I could zoom in to the face as I'm working on this. I always like to start drawings with the faces. Ah, sorry, my forehead's bumping my camera. Let me see if I can position this better so I don't bump it. So this is what I was talking about earlier about how I basically do my drawing 3 times at minimum, because now as I refine it here on my watercolor paper, I'm essentially going back and redrawing everything. But I like doing this. I actually find that it helps me spot mistakes and weird bits, parts where the composition doesn't work, or if anatomy is wonky and I need to find a reference for something. It gives me a chance to deal with those issues when, especially because I flip my drawing back and forth each time. Hello, I'm Alcoon, West Virginia. So this is only the third live streaming here on Instagram that I've done. The other 2 have been very spur of the moment, so I didn't really announce them when I did. I just sort of turned on my camera and started doing stuff. This is the first time I'm trying to announce it ahead of time, because I had a lot of people requesting that and saying I wanted to be there, but I couldn't because you didn't say anything. Part of the reason is that the way I work, there are certain phases where I can talk, and I actually enjoy having people around and talking and doing stuff, but there are other parts of my process where if I don't have quiet, then it's very frustrating for me, and I can't do my thing. And the problem is that I work one painting at a time. I don't really do multiples. So it's hard for me to predict if I will be in one of those stages where I can talk and have people looking over my shoulder, or if I'm going to be in one of those stages where I just want nothing or silence around me, you know. But I am going to try, I think, to do these live streaming sessions maybe once a week, maybe Monday at this time in the future, or I don't know if I might do a different time. Giving things a try. Just still sort of figuring this all out right now. I'm not going to be getting to the painting part of this today because this sketching is actually going to take several hours. This hand here is kind of a tricky bit. I always have to, I didn't use any references, but I did have to sort of hold my hand in front of my face and looking at the mirror and kind of wrap my brain around it to figure out which way is the thumb coming from. Because it's one of those contorted views where her hand is not just straight on, so it's kind of this my hand's too close, you can't see. So it's like this thing. It's that thing going on. I have done a painting once. At least once that I noticed it, where I finished the painting and I had the hand backwards because the thumb was on the wrong side of on the hand, and I had to go back. I had finished scanning and everything, and then I realized, oh shoot, I have the hand backwards. I had to go back and redo it and rescan it and everything. Let me know if you have questions about any of the stuff I'm doing or any other random questions that occur to you if you feel like throwing them out there. I might change this hand pose a little bit later because it is sort of awkward, and especially when you can't really see all the fingers because the flower is in the way. I don't want it to look weird, so I might modify it later on to something that is more easy to interpret upon viewing. I have a number of different erasers that I use. This one is for getting into smaller areas. I could use the kneaded eraser for that too, because you can quite easily get it to a point and then use that. But it's very soft and malleable, so when I want to get in more definitively, I use this. What was I doing? Oh yeah, because the stem wraps around her thumb here. Someone was asking earlier what my inspirations are, and another thing I wanted to mention was dance. And you see it in the poses and the fluid motion that I like to try to capture, but even things like the position of her arm and hand here, it feels very dance-like to me. I'm shading this stuff just to remind myself later that this is the part that is a little bit obscured, and it's going to be a little bit blurred because that's seen through the surface of the water. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize I was scrolled way up, and I didn't see all the questions that people have been asking. Have I made any drawings using black outlines, or do I not like it? Yeah, I generally don't really like doing outlines. I prefer, well, I mean, my pieces aren't realistic. I'm not photorealism. I'm definitely not that, but I'm also not all the way on the other side with outlined shapes and things, and I don't, it doesn't appeal to me as much. I enjoy something in between those two ranges. Let's see, for how long have I been doing art? Did I have some kind of routine for it at the beginning? And how did I develop or find my personal art style? So I have been painting and drawing all my life, is the short answer, but it's so, I've always loved art. It was always something I wanted to do, even when I didn't really believe it was feasible as a career. And it was always something I wanted to pursue, and I knew that I had to do it to be happy, even if it was just as a hobby, which I thought back then was what it would have to be, because everyone told me that I should not even bother trying to think about a career in art because it wasn't going to be feasible. And in their defense, at that time, in the late 90s or early 90s, I guess, the path to being a full-time artist was not an easy one to see a route for. I mean, it's not easy now, but there's definitely a path you can follow and a way forward that is much more reasonable than it seemed to be then. But yeah, I'm glad I did it. But I did start in software for 3 years before diving full-time into art, which was back in 2001 was when I took the dive. So I've been professionally doing art full-time for about 19 years now, which means that I paint every day. I paint and draw at some point for some little bit, at least, every single day. And I love it. In fact, if I didn't do some art every day, I get very stir crazy and unhappy. So, but the routine, when I was starting to get into this, so when I was still doing software, for example, I was in a routine even then. It was hard. It was really tough because I was working full-time at a software company, a startup software company in San Francisco. And, you know, I was fresh out of college, so they have high expectations for the hours that a college grad is going to be spending. You know, college grad that has no family yet and in a startup company. So it was pretty intense, and we were expected to work pretty long hours. And afterwards, I would go home in the evenings and I would paint till midnight. And I was also doing a lot of flamenco dancing at the time. I was dancing like 4 days a week. So I had a really packed schedule back then. And I remember when I first told my dad, hey, I'm going to quit software and I'm going to do this art full time. And he says, well, why can't you just keep doing what you've been doing now? Because that seems to be working for you, right? And I told him, yeah, it's working now because I'm really driven on this path. But if I'm going to sustain this for forever, it would drive me insane because I have very little outside time, you know, beyond doing my job and my software job and my art job and any sort of extracurricular stuff beyond that. So yeah, I did manage to do that for 3 years though. And it was a really intense time, and I enjoyed it, but it was not, even then I could tell it was not something that was going to be sustainable in the long term. It was something I was going to have to make a choice about. I had to drop one or the other, and I was not going to be dropping the art, so that's when I left software, which turned out to be a really good time because within half a year That was when the big .com crash happened in the Bay Area, and essentially all my software friends were out of jobs. So it all worked out really well for me. Sorry, that was a really long answer to that. How do I find my personal art style? I'll get back to that also, because I want to see if I can catch up with some of these other questions from people. Because, as I said, I was lame and I didn't notice all these other comments that were scrolling past me. Do I have any advice for aspiring watercolorists? What part of aspiration do you mean? Do you mean just as an artist enjoying the medium and creating stuff, technically, or as a career? Let me know, and I will answer that as well a little bit later. Am I looking at my tracing now for details or making new ones? I'm using my initial traced and transferred sketch over here as the general guide, and I'm erasing it almost entirely. So when I'm kind of dabbing at it with this kneaded eraser, I'm picking up most of the excess graphite so that I have these nice clean lines at the end with my 0.2 pencil. But I am using the initial trace transferred image as my guideline to follow for this. Do I typically draw until done, or I step away and come back later at a time to complete something? I draw until done. Well, I mean, I'm assuming you're talking about the whole painting process, not just the drawing. But yeah, I mean, I do this every day because this is what I do. So I do pretty much work on a piece until it is complete, because I feel uncomfortable when I leave a painting in an incomplete stage, because I get frustrated at them. I don't like the incomplete in between stages, because I feel like there's stuff wrong with it. There's stuff that I need to fix, and so that's kind of why I don't do more than one painting at a time. It's why I can only work on one piece at a time, because I feel compelled. I just can't stand having it sitting there waiting for me. So yeah, I pretty much go until it's finished. The exception for that is when I'm in the initial sketchy. Let me zoom back out. When I'm in the thumbnail sketching stuff, this stuff I constantly doodle in here, and I just scribble down ideas. Sometimes they are extremely rough like that. That's all I need. Other times they are a little bit more refined. Here's another one of my scribble sketches. This is just to get the idea down on a page, because I have this concept in mind of what I want to do, and I need to capture it on here onto a page while I remember it. Because I wrote an article about this on my Patreon a couple months ago, about how I think I'm pretty far in the aphantasia scale of things, where I don't actually envision things in my head. And so stuff doesn't really have solid form for me in my mind until it is in front of me. So if I don't sketch my thumbnails down when they happen, and it's not that I had this image of a tree, floating tree, and this is a little nautilus with a little rider on it and a city down below. If I don't scribble something down like this immediately when it happens, it drifts away from me. So having a thumbnail sketchbook is really important to me to solidify these concepts and ideas when they happen. how long does it take me to finish a painting? It varies. It really varies because some of my paintings are super small. Some of them are only 3 inches versus larger pieces. You know, this one that I have here right now is sort of a mid-largish size piece for me because it is, so I don't even know what the actual dimensions are. I'm guessing 18 inches tall by 12 wide. So this is one of the larger, slightly larger pieces for me, and this will probably take about 80 hours. I've had pieces take over 100 hours, but some of those 3-inch pieces, maybe those take half an hour. So there isn't really a general guideline for how long something takes. How do I know the proportions and lighting is right without reference? Well, I've drawn a lot of figures at this point. As I said, professionally, I've been doing this for almost 20 years now, and even before then, I was doing a lot of drawing and painting. And in this time, I've done a lot of figure drawing. I've done a lot of sketching from life, and so it's not that I don't have any references at all, but it's the practice, and it's sort of gets into your head, and you begin to have a feel for proportions and how things work and how it all fits together. And as for lighting, and this goes back to the fact that, you know, I'm not doing photorealistic paintings. So my lighting is more of a conceptual and atmospheric thing. Yeah, I do think about my light sources. I do think where the light's coming from, but it is not as important for me to have it be absolutely physics perfect. And if I do have something where the shadows are extremely important, where the shadows are going to play a part in the actual composition, the shadows and light, then yeah, I do put together some sort of reference, usually with myself or my daughter or my husband. I just do a quick snapshot photo of stuff and get things into the right lighting situation so that I can use that as a guide. Marla's asking, do I like shading the sketch with graphite prior to painting? For the most part, I don't shade. I only shaded the arm over here because that is sort of the part that's going to be, so here's my surface, my water surface line. This swiggle that goes across. So this is going to be above water, this is below water, and this section is sort of an intermediate zone where the viewer can see through the surface of the water at the figure, at things that are underneath. So those are going to be distorted and blurred by the surface water, and so I was just shading that to remind myself that that's where that section is. Ashley Strum says that I used to be in art club in 6th grade. I used to be in an art club too in high school. I got involuntarily voted as the president for the art club, which I didn't want to do because I'm super introvert. I mean, I've trained myself not to be because I do talks at conventions and I do talks at gallery shows and I have to meet a lot of people. And so I do enjoy being around people, but it is hard for me. And when I was younger, it was really hard for me because I hadn't really figured out that it was something you could train yourself to be better at and to be comfortable with. And my friends, my high school friends voted me as the president for the art club because I arted, so of course I want to be president, right? No. I hated doing that. I hated talking in front of people. I managed to make my way through it. We did a lot of murals and things, and it was fun, but I always hated getting up in front of people and talking. How did I find my style? Any tips? That is a question that gets asked a lot, not just of me, but every artist hears this. How do I find a style? And the answer to that is you don't really find a style. It happens. A style is what happens when you are drawing and painting things that you love, things that you enjoy. And style comes through then because it becomes the thing that you keep going back to because it is in your head and it's how you see things, it's how you see the world. And so you can't force it. You can't say, I want to make a style. You just have to do a lot of art. You have to keep drawing, keep painting, and eventually people will see what you've drawn and they'll say, hey, I know that, I recognize that. That's drawn and painted by, whoever. Because they'll see the things that are shining through as the elements that really make you. So don't worry about style. Don't worry about trying to find it. Don't be stressing out about that. Just do what you love and create things, and eventually a style will just happen. It's an effortless thing. It's not something that you have to worry about. Am I inspired by Art Nouveau? Yeah, I am. Just the beautiful flowing aspect of Art Nouveau is definitely something that appeals to me as well. And the botanical elements, how they're integrated in with a sense of design as well. Let's see. Has turning art into a career work made it less enjoyable for me? No, it has not, because I get to do it every day. I get to have people supporting me in doing the thing that I love doing. And so, no, it has not made it less enjoyable. In fact, it's made it much more enjoyable for me because it enables me. It allows me to do this stuff every single day and to not have to worry about some other job or career. And I'm really thankful and grateful that I've had 20 years of people wanting my art and allowing me to do this. But I should add as a caveat for that the reason why it has not affected my love of art is because one of the key things that I have always kept in mind is that if I'm not enjoying doing the art that I'm creating, then it's not worth doing. And I come to this way of thinking because I did those 3 years of software development, right? I worked for software for 3 years before I started doing art, and I thought that was going to be my lifetime career at the time. But I realized that if I wanted to just chase money, to put it really bluntly, stay in software and do the art as a hobby, because then I don't have to be beholden to anyone or anything, and I could, just do whatever I want. But if I was going to give up software and do art, then it was completely pointless to do that and then to just try to chase, what I thought would sell with the art instead of chasing what I wanted to create. And so that is super important. I've always felt like if you want to do art as a career, you have to You have to make certain that you are making the art that you want to make. Don't ever make it for anyone else. I mean, take commissions. I'm not saying that commissions are bad. I'm just saying that when you take commissions, you have to do it knowing that this is a commission that you want to do, and that every piece of art that you make is something that you want to make. Because as long as you're loving making it, then it is never going to be an unpleasant job. And it won't ever be something that you feel like you're forced to do. You're doing it because you want to do it. What's the longest painting I've ever done? Well, I don't really keep track of the actual hours that I spend on a painting. And especially since becoming a parent. Well, my daughter's 10 years old now. It was easier to keep track of my hours back when I only had my own day schedule to worry about. But when I have a child and I get lots of interruptions throughout the day, and especially now with everyone on lockdown and everyone home, there's even more interruptions. It's harder to keep track of the exact time and how long it takes me to do a painting. So I really have no idea. Whenever people ask me how long it takes to do something, it's really just a huge estimate on my part because I don't ever track the hours. Do I listen to music when I draw? I mostly listen to podcasts and audiobooks. I like to have stories engaging my mind when I am painting. That's actually only when I'm in the part of my process where I can have words going on. As I was mentioning earlier, there's phases where I need silence to work. And that's music too. Music is also included there. Anything interrupting me at that point, makes it hard for me to brainstorm and to determine my compositions. And so I need silence for those phases. But once I'm in a place where it's more like a mechanical aspect, even like doing this right now, I can talk to everyone and I can read my comments, and I enjoy this. I actually like having stuff going on as I'm in these parts. That's kind of why I like listening to audiobooks and podcasts while doing stuff like this. Do I accept custom orders? Also, are there payment plans for my originals? Custom original paintings, do you mean, Larissa? I very rarely, not too much. It depends on the idea. If it's something that really appeals to me, I might consider it. But for the most part, I have so many ideas that I am wanting to do on my own already that I don't take on too many custom orders. But yes, I do have payment plans for originals. So if you're interested in anything, just send me an email and I'll be happy to tell you what options there are. And so do the galleries, the two galleries I work with. So I work with Modern Eden in San Francisco and Haven Gallery in New York, and they have a few of my originals, both of them do. And both of them also have payment plans. So definitely drop me a line if you have any questions about that. Zephyr Inks is asking if I have any seahorses in my art. I have a few here and there. I can't remember when the most recent one is, but I know that some of the cups in my Shadowscapes Tarot have seahorses. Yeah, seahorses are pretty cool and fun. Have I ever done or will I do any sketches based on real life event situations or just my neighborhood, for example? Do you mean drawing from life? I mean, I do have a little sketchbook that I bring with me when I'm traveling, and I do plein air gouache paintings, mostly of places that I've gone and scenes. So yeah, I do some painting from life. Most of what you see in my Facebook feed and Instagram and everything is primarily either my fantasy work or botanical work, just because that is what most people expect from me. So I don't really share as often some of the off-brand, I guess you could say, type of sketches and artwork that I do. Just because there isn't as much interest in that generally from people. Hello, Arya, Indonesia. Secret admirer, how did I train myself out of being an introvert? And just like anything else, is practice. Putting yourself into those situations that you find awkward, you have to do it, and just trying to get out of your shell and talk with people. It's definitely not an easy thing, but I find that I do. So I used to be terrified of speeches. I still am. I'll say this. When I have to give a talk at a convention or at a workshop that I'm doing, I have butterflies in my stomach for a good 24 hours before the event. But I've found, so I do a lot of practice, and I just like practice and drill my talk into my head. And even though I know it forwards and backwards, I still get anxious and nervous. And I know it happens every time. I know it's going to happen because it does every single time. But I've found over time now that once I start doing the actual talks, I get into it. So there's a part of me that enjoys performing. I mean, that's why I love dancing. I like performing, and I enjoy getting up in front of people and doing something that I know that I can do. And speeches and talking, for some reason, just always didn't feel like that to me, you know? And I felt really awkward. I was always afraid I was going to drop my line of thought. And so one of the things that helped, and this was something that I did when I was performing flamenco, when I was doing dancing. I was doing that once a week at this restaurant. And a lot of times we would improvise and do stuff off the cuff. And I learned that my fear of getting up in front of people and doing stuff is frequently that I'm going to drop my line of thought or forget where I am. And then I'll be just left standing there looking stupid, right? And so the solution to that I found was that I planned for contingencies. I planned for places to pick up if I lost my place, and this was with dancing too, you know, if I lost my place in the music where the guitarist was playing, and I would know certain phrases where I could pick up again and what I would do for those sections. And the same worked then for giving speeches. I have planned places where I know I can always pick up the talk again if I were to completely lose my place and just forget what I was talking about. And having that as sort of a safety net really helped me get over the anxiety of talking. And then there's things like, you know, going to events, and galleries are always a really awkward setting for this because you don't know anyone. At least, especially not at first. And at least with conventions, everyone's got name tags, but with galleries, no one has a name tag, and maybe you'll know someone there, maybe you won't, and it's really scary at first for me when I was doing that, and I didn't know anyone in the gallery scene, and I would just go, and if someone looked interested in something, I would try picking up a conversation with them, and I found that most people were very receptive to that, and people were there to interact and talk with others. So it can be scary, but you just gotta throw yourself out there and do it, and think of it as practice. Do I ever get overwhelmed by planning these compositions at this stage? Yes and no. I mean, yeah, you can get overwhelmed, but I deal with that via my process because I'm going at this in stages. Because I go through it with my rough sketch, and then I figure out the main focal parts of my image, and then I have that on my computer, and I deal with the more overall composition at that point. So I don't get overwhelmed then because my process allows for me to deal with the complexity of the composition in these chunks and breaking them down in a way that makes them much more manageable. Do I feel pressured to crank out more paintings for social media? No, I don't let it bother me. But part of that is because I have such a big backlog of artwork because I've been doing this for 20 years. I have a lot of stuff in my archives. And so I have a lot of things that I can pull out and use as filling in for when I'm working on more longer term projects. But even when I am working on larger scale projects, that's all material I could use for social media, like this right now. I mean, this is a pencil sketch, and here we are talking about this. So, yeah, I think that you can find ways to use whatever you are doing for social media. If you're looking for content, there's always process stuff, and there's always little bits of behind the scenes that you could show people, so you don't have to come up with new content constantly. And I don't think you should let that drive you because it just becomes this hamster wheel and will make you unhappy trying to keep up with it all the time. But yeah, it does get a ton easier once you have a nice archive of work that you can fall back on, because with 20 years of work in my folders, I have a lot of stuff that many of my newer followers have never seen before. And so it's nice to be able to share that stuff still. What eraser am I using? So I've got a few erasers. This one is called Mono Zero by Tombow. This is, I can't remember what this one is. It's a low dust one. I'll have to see if I can remember that. And this is just a kneaded eraser. Oh, looks like I caught up to questions. Have I ever considered digital art or something like Procreate for iPad? I use Procreate sometimes for my sketching, for my compositional sketching, but I don't really do any finished art digitally anymore. I used to. I started off my career doing a lot of digital art, in fact. And I've told this story sometimes at conventions, so if you've been to any of my shows, you might have heard this story. But I was doing digital art primarily when I was in college, mostly because the art program where I was at was super abstract expressionism, modern fine art, and I hated well, I didn't hate it, but I was frustrated by a lot of stuff because I wanted to do illustrative stuff, and they hated that. They did hate that. That's not too strong a word for what they thought of it. So I did what was necessary for the art program, but I felt this need to do something completely 180 degrees different from what was going on in my classwork. So I was, and I was doing software because I was studying software, and so I started doing digital art with Photoshop 1.0. It was brand new back then, and I did that for my fantasy art on the side. And when I graduated from college, I had all the abstract stuff that I was doing for my coursework, and I had all this digital fantasy art that I'd been doing for myself on the side. And I had decided I wanted to start sending out my portfolio to various companies. And so I sent my portfolio of primarily digital art to Wizards of the Coast for Magic the Gathering. And the art director there replied to me, surprisingly, because most often if you're going to get rejected, you don't hear from the art director at all. But he replied to me and he said that he enjoyed my artwork, but they did not accept digital art. They weren't accepting digital art. This was in 1998, which is really funny to think right now because most art done for publication is at least partially digital, if not entirely. And so yeah, he told me that they didn't accept digital art and that he would love to review my portfolio again when I had some traditional media pieces to show him. On hindsight, I thought years later that maybe this was a nice way of him encouraging me to submit my portfolio again because it wasn't quite there yet. But I think there was some skepticism still of digital art at that time. So that was actually the reason why I started doing watercolors, because I really did want to work for Wizards of the Coast. And so I then looked around, and I'd been doing a lot of acrylic work in my courses, but I came across some watercolors at a gallery in San Francisco, and I sort of fell in love with the transparency and the purity of the colors. And so I dug out a watercolor set and decided to give that stuff a try, and the rest is history. Oh yeah, someone, Elnac, Faber-Castell, that is what this one is. You're correct. That's the name of the company that makes this eraser. I like the low dust ones. I hate tons of eraser dust. It drives me nuts. So I like using these. Marie Conlon, what kind of shows do I usually display booth? I do fantasy conventions, gaming conventions, comic conventions. I used to do a lot more of these. These days I don't really do nearly as many. Once upon a time I was going to 12 shows in a year. Now it's more like 1 or 2. And it looks like for the foreseeable future, with the way things are going, though, there's going to be a big fat 0 for that, for me and for everyone else doing shows. And yes, I have done a tarot deck, the Shadowscapes Tarot, which came out in 2009. It's been out for over a decade now. Have I worked with oil paint before? Very, very long ago. I would say not seriously within my professional career time period, though I have not used oils. I don't really have the space in my studio house for that because I don't really want fumes everywhere, and I don't really have any other dedicated space to do it in. But I love watercolors, so I don't see myself shifting away from that anytime soon. What is the intro music on my YouTube videos? That is something that I put together myself. I used a music composition app. I'm trying to remember the name of it. Symphony, I think. is the name of it on my iPad. You have to be able to read and write music though to use that one, because it's actually a music composition thing. My daughter's been using GarageBand a lot to make her own songs and things. She's having a lot of fun with that. But yeah, the intro music on my YouTube videos, that was actually a piece that I wrote for my mini palette Kickstarter release a couple of years ago, and I just liked it, so I've ended up using it as my video intro music for good now. Any plans on doing an update to my Shadowscape series, Marla? If I do, I'll either have to find another publisher or else do it on my own as a self-publish, because sadly F&W Books went bankrupt last year, and it looks like it has been picked up. Their whole imprint has been picked up by Penguin, but it does not look like Penguin's going to be reprinting the existing line of stuff. I might be able to talk to Penguin and see if they would be interested in doing another book, but so far, yeah, I haven't had a chance to consider doing another tutorial book yet. Also, the thing is that publishing a tutorial book, a publisher, at least if I go with a publisher, they generally want stuff that is more general population accessible. So doing traditional watercolors and not going off the beaten path with other extra materials and supplies the way I do, which is why in the recent years I've just decided to do all this via Patreon, because then I know that my specific audience is interested in this stuff, whereas a publisher wants something that everyone is interested in, and I'm not so sure that it's as accessible to a wider audience like that. So doing things via Patreon allows me to just go all out with the weird other things that I do. If I was to do another Dreamscapes series of books, what would you be interested in seeing in there, is my question for you. When designing a tarot deck, what do I keep in mind? Do I follow the general story of the tarot, or do you base it on intuition? It's a little bit of both. I follow the Coleman Waite Rider Smith? Yeah, that one. I followed the general symbology and meaning of that, although I recreated the scenes using my own language of symbols and references and scenes. But the general meanings, I stuck to that. Do I have Amazonite Genuine by Daniel Smith? I'm not sure. I think I might. I don't remember. I'll have to dig through my stash again to look. Have I ever worked with handmade watercolor pigments? If so, what are your thoughts? I've only worked with a few, and so far the ones I have worked with I like. The ones lately I've been using are Artistic Isle. Those are the shimmery mica ones that you've been seeing in some of my recent Instagram posts. I haven't worked with too many others. I have a few, but I can't remember the names of the brands for those, so I'll have to look that up later. Yeah, it is too bad about the books, Marla. I was bummed about that too, because I thought that was kind of a neat thing, and it was a way that my art was introduced to a lot of younger people. A lot of people would come across my art, and it was nice to hear them say, "Hey, I found your tutorial books, and it really inspired me when I was in grade school." It was in the library. How many hours to do the pencil, and how many to do the paint? It, again, as I mentioned before, it really is something that is a variable depending on how much detail there is in the drawing or the painting. It's going to take a lot longer or a lot less. All right, it's been about 70 minutes now. Time has gone by really fast. Are there any other questions? I'm going to be calling an end to this in a little bit. And I'm going to try to do this. I'm going to try to do this on Mondays at this time, I think. So tentatively, I'll say we'll do this again next Monday, again at 1 p.m. Pacific time. But thank you everyone for joining me. This was fun. I had a good time. And I'm going to try saving this and uploading it to my YouTube as a video. I don't know if I'll be able to do it this time. I tried the previous times and I failed, but we'll see. Cross my fingers that this time it works. Thank you, everyone.